welcome back to the third episode in the week 2 lecture recordings. I try and do these so that you can see them as a video, but also you can listen to them as a podcast. And so just you should download the slides and have a look at them as you go. But really, the slides are as much as anything for keeping me on track. So let's just dig right in. The purpose of this particular video is to look at what's actually happening when it comes to technology and the way that law is being practiced, and in particular to look at the predictions that Richard Susskind made about the profession and what is happening now. So in the reading that you have, Richard Susskind outlined 13 different technologies that have the ability to disrupt or transform the legal profession. And so basically we're going to focus today on AI. So as I work through and talk very briefly about these technologies, I'm going to indicate where I think AI might be relevant, and starting with the first one. Automation. Now, automation is something that in some ways the rest of the world takes very much for granted, but has really impacted the legal profession in recent years. So one of my roles, in fact, I work in a law firm part-time, as many of you will know, and a large part of the work that I'm doing in that law firm is effectively working with what we call precedents. Now, as a law student, you are very familiar with the idea of precedents in the sense that a decision that has been made by a court in a relevant jurisdiction will be a precedent that a lower court or a court in the same jurisdiction may need to follow. Lawyers, somewhat confusingly for a profession that prides itself on precision with language, lawyers in practice will often refer to precedents as being effectively templates or starting documents that they will use when they are documenting a transaction. So some of them will be merely templates, so forms for filling in particular court forms or forms that are prepared by a regulator like ASIC or the PPSR regime or the ACCC or something like that. But many of them will be firm specific or context specific, and they'll really be anything from a template to a first draft. Now, many of those are now more and more being automated. So automation or document automation generally refers to the ability to generate a relatively polished or customized first draft of a document in response to questions that are asked by their users. So often the drafter will be given a list of variables, so basically blocks to fit in, but more and more present documents are becoming more sophisticated, and questions will be asked and the document will spit out at the other end. Sometimes, particularly when they are sophisticated in that way, the lawyer is taken out of the exercise. The form is filled in by the client or the person who needs a legal document prepared for them, and so maybe it's filled out online or something like that, and then they get a bespoke or a document that suits them at the other end. There are a number of services that provide this. You might like to have a look online to there's one called LawPath, which is an Australian provider of that kind of service. One of its founders was a partner in one of the larger law firms. So Nick Abrams from a firm called Norton Rose is one of the founders, which is kind of interesting. You know, that firm provides high-end, bespoke, sophisticated legal services, but LawPath is really preparing legal-like documents for small businesses or individuals. Of course, preparing documents like this, once you've got the template, when you've got the investment in the technology down, the documents themselves can be prepared very, very quickly. And clearly that impacts thinking about the way that we charge for that work. Lawyers tend to charge for their time, although that is changing substantially. And the business model for charging time or for charging for legal services is changing dramatically. Another thing that is really impacting all kinds of businesses is what Susskind refers to, and many others do too, as relentless connectivity. So when we talk about relentless connectivity, we're talking about systems that really prevent people from entirely disengaging from the workplace or from their clients. Again, I've started telling stories already about my own experience, but this little device that follows me around everywhere, and I'm just going to spend a second now to put into focus mode so it doesn't keep binging and beeping at me while I'm talking to you. These kind of devices can mean it's very hard for us to switch off. And as I said before, that time period between getting instructions and responding to those instructions, the expectations have become narrower and narrower. And those expectations really impact the way that we do work, and what the expectation is of external parties as to what good legal services look like. Online marketplaces, or let me highlight that, electronic legal marketplaces, including online reputation systems, so things like LinkedIn or Glassdoor or any kind of system that allows clients to share their views on the performance and the levels of services that lawyers provide, or anything that provides price comparison systems, which can provide opportunities for both employees and for clients to compare the respective prices and rates of different legal advisors or salaries that they pay, really can impact the way in which law firms do business. Also, the rise in providers of the equivalent of consulting services. So things like Expert 360, which actually I don't think it actually allows lawyers on its platform yet, but Airtasker or Upwork, any of these platforms that allow people to bid for any kind of professional work, theoretically at least, could disrupt and change the way in which lawyers create and maintain relationships with their clients, bid for and charge for work. E-learning. Sorry. Not quite sure what's going on with my computer here today. I think there are real opportunities for change and disruption coming out of the way that we learn the law, we teach the law, and also in which we inform our clients about what the law is. Already you are getting lectures online. Hello, that's what I'm doing right now. And this is something that until relatively recently was really a minority situation, not the predominant situation. And really the need to deliver legal information online has really changed the way we think about teaching and learning the law. The technologies that allow us to deliver content online are growing exponentially. In fact, many of the unicorns, so-called unicorns in the tech space, in other words, companies that have started with nothing and then become very valuable very quickly are in the online education space. The technologies extend well beyond something as boring and straightforward as what I'm doing, recording a lecture in advance so you can listen to it or watch it on your own time, and beyond things like webinars and team meeting. We're seeing much more growth in the use of simulated legal practices. Some of you might be familiar with a company called The Forage, Forage. It offers law firms the opportunity to deliver simulated internships. So opportunities for you as law students free of charge to basically practice and experience what it would be like working for these different law firms in ways that allow you to grow your legal muscle outside of just the study of law in a traditional way. Beyond formal education, e-learning is also expected to transform the way that law firms will provide their services to their clients, and also ways in which they will share internal knowledge with their own staff and with trusted advisors. This is closely related to this idea of online legal guidance as well. So online legal guidance technologies are essentially systems that can provide legal information or guidance and even advice, I guess, over the internet. Sometimes they might be subscription based. So I mentioned LawPath before. Small businesses can sign up to a subscription service there to have their questions answered by lawyers or to get quotations for legal services when they need it. These kind of services have the ability to disrupt the profession in a number of ways. So if clients can secure guidance and legal documents online, then they're going to be in a position where they can compete for this kind of service on price. And so low-cost competitors can essentially systematize and automate these services to compete online with more traditional consultative face-to-face advisory services. And as the clients get more sophisticated, they too can choose between, do they just need a form off the shelf, or do they really need that detailed advice and strategic thinking that the time with a lawyer can help them with? The next one that Susskind talks about is open sourcing. So legal open sourcing is related to the general open source movement. This is something that if you study intellectual property, you are likely to spend a little bit of time thinking about. So open sourcing or open source software is often referred to as free software, but it's free as in, usually as in terms of free to share, free to amend, not necessarily free as in no payment required. Open source material or software benefits from the growth and the input of many different people. So instead of one person just preparing the software and then selling it, actually many people can compete and input and create the open source software, and as those benefits are shared, then many people get the benefit of it. Open source software might sound counterintuitive, but there are many open source security and encryption products. And the benefit of the open source is that it's being tested regularly by a range of different people. And so it comes with kind of, when you don't trust anybody, then you end up trusting everybody, which is something that we will talk about, that trustless environment, when we hit talk about crypto and blockchain in a week or two, I think. So if we're talking about this in terms of law, there's potential for online mass collaboration in the field of law. There are movements that are devoted to building up large quantities of public, community-oriented legal materials, such as standard documents, checklists, flowcharts, links to what the law is. One of the most interesting and successful open source projects in the law is Ostly. Ostly was originally a kind of challenge to traditional legal publishers and effectively an open source project to make the law freely available to a range of people. So there are many links to that externalization and commoditization of the legal profession in this legal open sourcing space. And it's likely to be very disruptive for lawyers simply due to the fact that the legal content that was once chargeable as part of a lawyer's service is now available for no fee, I should say. So when I started in the law, one of the barriers to entry, in addition to getting a law degree, of course, was it was really hard to work out what the law was unless you had access to those leather-bound books that law firms paid an absolute fortune to get hold of, and which in fact was really hard to buy them if you weren't a lawyer, to get those copies of the cases and those really serious textbooks. Nowadays, actually finding what the law is easy. Everything is, and I believe it should be, freely available online. However, working out what it means, the actual value add of what it means to be a lawyer, is a much trickier thing perhaps than it's ever been before. The next one that Susskind refers to is workflow or project management. So when we talk about high volume, repetitive legal work, more and more we're seeing firms and courts deploy workflow systems. So automated checklists, systematic approaches to the standardization steps, whether that's right at the beginning of the matter, at the end of the matter, or through the whole process. So project management systems are often better suited to legal tasks and activities that are more complex, less structured, but are still amenable to more disciplined handling than the ad hocery that's found in law firms and in-house departments. Now, I don't want to berate our profession, but often the way that people do things does tend to be very ad hoc. In fact, you know, that analogy of the swan gliding so gracefully underneath, just, batting its webbed feet and looking like chaos. My experience of law firms, and I don't want to pick on any in particular, is that is often the case because the work is relentless. It is complex. It's often, while you as a lawyer might do the same kind of transaction over and over again, often you're dealing with somebody who it's the first time that they've ever been divorced, had to seek probate on a will, sold their business, bought a business, any of those things. So there's a combination of hand-holding and complex thinking to ensure that you deal with all of the relevant risks. And often, particularly because we charge by time, there hasn't been the incentive or the need to stand back and look at how might we develop a process or a workflow for doing this cleanly and in a repetitive way. But as more and more firms are competing on price and are competing in a much more complex world where minor errors can be identified and addressed more quickly, then we're seeing that there is a lot more workflow and project management, particularly in mergers and acquisitions, in areas relating to significant disputes, insurance, and where you've got many matters working in very similar ways. You're seeing a lot more process in that way. Oh, sorry, I didn't highlight it. Let's highlight two in a row then. Embedded legal knowledge. So what do we mean by that? Susskind talks about this as referring to systems, tools, and processes that have legal rules embedded within the system setup and the system design. Embedded legal knowledge technologies wouldn't require people to know the law or to monitor compliance with the law. Instead, the regulations would be embedded in the building or the car or the system itself. And so the disruption here would be when the rules are embedded, lawyers no longer need to draw the client's attention to the circumstances of legal significance. Where we're seeing this play out in practice is in the blockchain, and in particular the use of smart contracts. So a smart contract, at risk of totally oversimplifying the idea, it's a contract, a standard type of contract that says if this happens, then this is the result. So contract is, I promise you that if it rains more than 100 millimeters in any 2-day period and your crops are ruined, we will make a payout to you. And then with a smart contract, if we built that kind of insurance contract into a smart contract, we could have a sensor in the wheat or barley field that is measuring the rainfall. And when the sensor gets to 100 mils, essentially the condition for payment has been set, and it should automatically require a payment. So we're seeing this kind of embedded legal knowledge, this smart contract law, really start to take off in the last little while. Now, I'm a lover, not a fighter, so my knowledge, I have to say, of online dispute resolution, or ODR, is more theoretical than it is practical. But ODR, or online dispute resolution, is where the process of resolving a legal dispute, including or especially the formulation of the solution to that dispute, is entirely or largely conducted across the internet. So in the last 18 months, 2 years, over the time of the pandemic, a great deal of legal dispute resolution has been conducted through online avenues, including the involvement of video conferences, videos in court, moving admission in court, etc. Online dispute resolution, though, at its absolute forefront, is even more sophisticated again. If you're interested in looking at this area, a lot has happened, particularly in the Netherlands, where in the Netherlands you can get a non-contested divorce settlement online with pretty much no human involvement. And the process is really, really well regarded. This is an area that Richard Susskind himself has been researching and working in extensively. So he is one of the chairs of the, just need to remember the name of it, but he's a special advisor to the UK courts in relation to the use of online dispute resolution. And online dispute tools are being used significantly by arbitrators and mediators in a range of different circumstances. Now for something I'm particularly interested in is document analysis, particularly document analysis using artificial intelligence. So there are a range of new techniques that have been adopted within the profession over the last 5, slightly more years, which draw from disciplines that really we call AI, machine learning, big data, analytics, some and all of those things. We particularly see it in large transactions and in large-scale litigation, where there are significant amounts of discovery in a litigation sense or due diligence in a transactional sense, and where essentially poor old board graduates and junior lawyers used to spend hours and hours reading document after document after document looking for differences. AI is being trained to go through the documents to find the things that stand out. So, of course, there are some really dramatic dimensions of machine learning, and we'll talk about that in the next video, most of which have not been even close to being deployed in a legal practice. So we're not really seeing machine learning being used to write legal documents or to reinforce learning algorithms that will create pleadings or orders or anything like that. It's really clear that the emerging systems will inevitably be incorporated within the legal profession. A quick Google search of TAR, Technology Assisted Review, so the acronym TAR is used very frequently, will lead you to many, many providers of this kind of technology. Next, let's talk about machine prediction. This is also another element of artificial intelligence or machine learning techniques which make predictions. And really, when you think about a lot of what lawyers do is we make predictions. Let's face it, no matter goes to court unless there are at least two lawyers, one on each side, who have a general sense that they might win. We'll talk for reasons, we'll talk when we get into the second half of the course about the reasons why it would be improper if you thought there was no chance of winning, of allowing allowing your client to go to court, unless you can't stop them, of course. But in most cases, we've got at least one lawyer who's predicted that based on the facts to hand and the state of the law, that they think they have a reasonable chance of winning. Now, both of them can't be right, and at least one of them is always wrong, right? But just like any kind of diagnostic, there are definitely tools that come from the AI world that will help lawyers work out what it is that the options are. There's a tool that I thought was particularly interesting, built using IBM's Watson, which, as far as I know, really only got used in the USA, where what it would do is if you were taking a matter to court and you knew who the judge was, you could basically use it to analyze the different legal strategies that you were looking at, and it would predict, based on the past performance of the judge, which line of cases and which line of legal reasoning was most likely to be persuasive to that particular judge. Very, very interesting indeed, and I'm sure the judges didn't like it very much. I think that technology was bought by one of the big legal publishers, Thomson Reuters perhaps, or LexisNexis, I'm not sure, Westlaw. Ultimately, law firms hold a lot of data, and along with the data that is publicly accessible about the law, the data that they hold about what their clients do commercially and how arrangements are settled is really valuable. And a lot of that is held in the brains of senior lawyers and QCs. But it's actually completely predictable that it could be held in the brains of, well, in a machine of some sort. Now, the last of the technologies that Susskind talks about in the reading is legal question answering. So LQA is a branch of computer science which is devoted to the development of systems, I guess you'd call them, systems that automatically respond to questions that humans put in everyday language. So all of us have dealt with chatbots. I'd suggest, for a good example of how this is playing out in practice, have a look at the ATO website. They have a chatbot, they call it Alex, and Alex is basically as good as, if not better than, somebody on the phone at the tax office with finding which bit of that enormous website that the tax office runs is going to be most likely to answer your question. So clearly, this kind of technology is being used all over the place. Its application is not in any way limited to the law. But by focusing on the legal profession, it's likely that legal question answering could disrupt more than just the way that practicing lawyers work. It could also disrupt the common perception of the legal process. And often somebody else's perception will be your reality. So, central to the idea of increasing efficiency and collaboration or collaboration strategies, and also to that idea of working differently, is a term that Susskind argues is both vile yet vital, and that's this idea of commoditization. So Susskind reiterates that the word has been used incorrectly. He says in the reading that the main thinking behind the term is that what was once a handcrafted, bespoke piece of drafting can in fact be routinized. Routinized? For an Englishman, he's very good at verbing words. So it can be routinized or routinized and disposed of quickly with little need for lawyers' intervention. So from the client's point of view, the shift towards turning things into a routine tends to be a good thing because it leads to much lower fees. So one of the kind of constant questions for lawyers is, how do I do my work effectively and efficiently in a way that my clients will be prepared to pay for it? Particularly as there's a lot of sunk cost, a lot of work, effort, and experience that goes into creating the base. So the first version of that document, but the second, third, fourth, fifth, they're essentially free. So how do you find a model for charging for that when you're so used to charging for your time? This is a question that is really pushing the profession at the moment, and something that you might find useful to think about, particularly for your second assignment. So I mentioned before this idea of automation. I'm going to come back to it to really use it as a descriptor, I guess, for this commoditization or standardization of legal services. And over time, we see many aspects of the law and legal services which used to be bespoke, and a lawyer would choose a law firm, a client would choose a law firm or a lawyer because of their ability to deal with that particular type of transaction. Just to be clear, I'm using bespoke here the way that you might talk about a London suit, a bespoke tailor, made to measure, custom made. So let me actually give you an example. So if we think about a bespoke document, back more than 100 years ago now, a document dealing with a mortgage, for example, would have essentially been bespoke. It would have been handwritten, developed for the particular transaction. And then over time, particularly once you could use a printer in an actual office, which is actually way more recently than you might think, sort of in the last 100 years, 80, 100 years, then what you were seeing initially is forms that were being made, but they'd be handwritten or filled in along the way. So that was a standardization. Ultimately now, when we're thinking about systemization, if we're thinking about property documents, all of this is happening in a completely paperless way now. Any of you who are law clerks, any of you who are interested in working in property, it'd be worth making sure you become familiar with PEXA. PEXA is basically an online system for ensuring that all of the various parts of a conveyancing project can be pulled together. And it's been a significant change in the way that we work over recent years. So Susskind says there's been an evolution of legal services that go beyond bespoke, but now incorporate both standardisation and systemisation, which not only help clients manage their costs, but also promote more efficient use of time of the lawyer. Now, this is why I'm not worried about systemisation. I like it because I would rather use my brain and I would rather do something new than just be filling in forms every day. But it is quite a scary thing for much of the profession. Systemisation extends to the computerisation of checklists or procedure manuals into what we know now as workflow systems. These workflow systems are commonly used in the insurance industry and in law firms that service that industry. So we're seeing where there's automation of high volume, often considered low value, tasks and activities. Over the last 10 years or so, the organisation CLOC, Corporate Legal Operations Consortium, has really developed some muscle in the legal industry. Initially started in the US by a group of corporate counsels, so lawyers who work in-house, who are trying to separate out what kind of things do they do that are legal work and what things are legal operations that might be better done by either automation in some way or by less expensive and well or highly trained employees. I've also got some logos, the diagram that I have on the slide, so do have a look at this slide if you're listening online, shows the 12 core areas of the kind of things that general counsel or corporate counsel do, which they have as a consortium agreed really need to fall within the operations category. I've also got the logos of two other companies that are doing a lot in the systemisation space at the moment. Joseph is a really interesting one. I like them because they're Australian. Actually, Checkbox may well be an Australian company too. Both of them have received significant investment. Both of them provide sort of forms of automation. Joseph is actually a chatbot offering, which are no-code solutions to systemising legal work. When we think about externalisation, I've got some examples on the slide here. LawPath I've mentioned. Checkbox and Joseph could also fall within this category. And I think it's always worth having a look at examples of chatbots that are used in the broader sense. So the picture that I have on the slide is of Joshua Browder, who when he was 19 years old, and not a lawyer by the way, he established the Do Not Pay app. So it's basically a chatbot that was originally built to contest parking tickets. These days it's expanded to include a whole range of other services, and it calls itself the first of the robot lawyers. These days it used to be free. Basically how Mr. Broder and his investors make their money is that people sign up to a subscription. They pay a fixed fee every 3 months or so, and currently it's available in the United Kingdom and the United States. There's a parking fine bot that's been developed by one of the legal services in I think in New South Wales, but I could be wrong there, that does similar things. And a lot of this innovation has come out of community legal services who, again, like corporate counsel, they're dealing with the requirement to do more with less and less every time. So while we're talking about technology here, I think Susskind is right when he points out that actually what we're really talking about is understanding what work is legal work and that needs to be done by lawyers, and what work can be done in different ways using less sophisticated intellect, to be perfectly frank, or using machines. So one of the key recommendations that Susskind made, and which, I mean, these recommendations were made some time ago and have been reinforced since, and we're seeing this in the profession, is this idea of decomposing. Terrible word. It makes me think of the dead bodies in a, I don't know, FBI camp somewhere. Sorry, stop my brain from going in that direction. I think probably I would say unbundling of legal services more than anything else. So let me actually show you what I mean by that. I'll just, again, look at the slides if you haven't seen them. Basically, if we look here at the list of things that he suggests could be decomposed or unbundled, by breaking up what litigation requires, he's identified these requirements of document review, legal research, project management, litigation support, disclosure, whether that's electronic or not, I guess, strategy, tactics, negotiation, and advocacy. Now, essentially, talking to lawyers in the UK, he's invariably hearing that strategy and tactics, they're the bespoke things. They're the actual value add that a senior litigation lawyer brings. And that's pretty much the same in the US as well, although many would add advocacy there. And general counsel are saying that alternative providers can now take on the remaining tasks, the other things on this list, at lower costs and sometimes to a higher quality than traditional law firms can. Same list, or if we're looking at transactions, so M&A, mergers and acquisitions, buying and selling things, a range of similar type of transactions. Again, if we ask lawyers what are the things that they really do add value that couldn't be done by anyone else, it's the bespoke drafting and the legal advice on the complex issues. So when we're talking about alternatives, and there are a number that Susskind talks about, now I'm not going to go through each of these one by one here, but essentially what he does is pulls out other ways that these legal services can be provided and really challenges the profession to think, is the work that you are doing legal work? Now, this is a challenging question for you, and I'm going to finish up in just a second. But what I really want you to focus on is going back to what we were talking about last week. What is legal work? What is the work that you will be particularly suited to doing when you have your qualification and you hold a practicing certificate once you've been admitted? What will legal work look like, and which parts of it will be done by you and which parts of it might be done in alternative ways, by technology or under an alternative business model. I'm going to finish up this week focusing on artificial intelligence, and you can join me in the next video for exactly that purpose. See you there.